I call this pose exploration. Basically what this is a scene with 5 different rigs inside of it where I'm trying to figure out how I want to plan out my animation going forward. When you're in games, at least for me on WoW, when I was there, you don't get like a creative brief really in terms of like, oh, this is what this cycle needs. It's more kind of like, okay, we need a channel directed, meaning like this guy, he's a Fel Lord, is casting a spell. Either he can use his weapon, he can use his hand, he can use his fist like this, like an arrow, but it's got to be like a directed beam of energy that comes out of them. So the first thing I do is I create like a library of a couple different poses and try them out as much as possible. This isn't something I can do every single time, but it's something I try to do as much as I possibly can. There's value in these poses that exceeds just the poses themselves, because I obviously only ended up using one of these poses, but the other 4 are all good. So it's kind of like if there is another animation later on that you're like, oh, I wish I could just have this. I ended up taking all the other 4 poses that I didn't use and putting them in our pose library and just having them so that, you know, on the rare occasion, or not even rare occasion, on the occasion that somebody asks for, oh, you know, I need like a, you know, him raising his axe up in the air pose. I've already got one from before, so there should be no wasted work. So when I'm doing this initial pose test, I focus on everything. And that's what I'm telling you guys to do for your first blocking pass as well too, is there isn't a control on this rig that I didn't touch throughout the posing process. I'm trying to keep contrapposto in mind. You know, the idea that like when one shoulder goes down, the hip on the same side goes up. Same thing here, hip goes up on this side, the shoulder goes down on this side. It's kind of the law of opposites all over the place. I'm trying to do that everywhere I can here. Making sure I'm even doing things like touching the face and trying to add some sort of asymmetry to the face in this blocking phase. I call this a tone pose, meaning like it really helps when you're blocking. If you don't want to do, and I normally don't do a new face pose for every single pose in my blocking at the beginning, but what I will do is I'll do the first one because I want it to encapsulate the tone of what I'm doing right here. 99% of the time in animation for games, it's anger, right? Because somebody's swinging a sword or somebody's, you know, shooting a gun or whatever. So you've got this kind of like scowl on their face. I find that my body poses end up so much better once I have something to work off of on the face. Remember I was saying attitude is everything? That's true here in the blocking process as well. So my initial pass, I try to do as many different ideas as I possibly can. Axe forward, axe up in the air. This is applying gravity to things, making sure that even in your poses, there's a sense of gravity there. The chain is pointing down. The chain doesn't want to point down. I've got it in world, probably. This control right here. I've got it in rotate world, so that if I were to move this thing, it would always be pointing downwards, but that's an important factor. If this character's got this axe up in the air, like this in the air, all of the stuff that's hanging off of his face is going to be pointed downwards towards the ground. That gives it, that's called, you know, like adding the gravity to the pose. All of these poses I have already checked by this point in silhouette mode. I find that incredibly helpful just to be able to look at these things with no lights on and see, okay, is there at least 1, 2, 3 angles that I can spin around this pose and it looks dynamic and interesting and I can read what happens. That's the most important thing. Yeah, if it's dynamic, that is important, but really, do I know what's happening by looking at the silhouette of the pose? If I don't, there's no point in me continuing with that pose because it's just not clear enough. So I try to put the thing I'm trying to emphasize as far out of the silhouette as I can. You guys aware of the concept of like open and closed poses? An open pose, something like this, character like, oh, you know, in a channel of light or something. Closed pose, all of that stuff stays within the outer silhouette of the character. This is a lot harder for me to understand, but this is a lot easier for me to understand because I'm taking the limbs and I'm pulling them out of the silhouette of my body so that it's just a more clear read. When you're doing this much physical stuff, pantomime is so important.